There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
I am absolutely delighted to welcome Abhishek from Bangalore in India to Bite Size Book Chats. And I've just met him for the first time just a few minutes ago, but he is the winner of my Sean the Book Maniac 4-year anniversary book cover fragment contest. And it was a very difficult contest, and he's the winner. So I'm doubly delighted to finally be talking to Abhishek. Hello, Abhishek.
Hello, Sean. Yeah, I mean, great to be here in the Zoom call, meeting you in person and talking to you in person. And you can see from my face that I am delighted as well to be here, and also winning the contest was amazing. Yes.
Well, you're amazing for getting a 19 out of 20 of the covers right. That was nobody else came even close. I think the next highest number of guesses was maybe 10 or 11. So yeah, you did extremely well. So Abhishek is here to talk about a book that he recently read that I have never read, and it's by an author that I am not overly fond of. And yet, I think the one book by this author that I might like or would most likely enjoy is the one that he's read. And we're talking. So, shall I mention the author? It's Kazuo Ishiguro, and
Yes.
his maybe most well-known novel, The Remains of the Day.
I have it
Abhishek,
here.
you have it here, and you like the cover. Why don't you hold it up there?
Yes.
It matches your
Okay.
lovely yellow wall.
Background. Yes. Correct.
So tell us about it, Abhishek.
Yeah. So just to give a brief intro about the book, I think it's quite popular book given the the stature of the author as well, and it won the Booker in 1989. So it's basically a story, narrated from the perspective of a pretty esteemed butler in the 1950s and even 40s during World War II in England. He goes on a 6-day journey on suggestion of his new master at Darlington Hall, and he basically the purpose of the trip was to see Miss Kenton, who was his association during his time at Darlington Hall. But he also decided to it would be a nice time for him to take actually a break after 30, 35 years of service at Darlington Hall and see England and its whole beauty. So and throughout the trip, we he reminisces about his past and about his work tenure at Darlington Hall and how there were certain events of extreme importance throughout the World War II. And because his master was of individual of high importance and high effect in England, so he had a particular involvement and an effect also on those events and their proceedings, right? Is like a passage north, right? So you read that recently. There's a lot
Yes.
of it's a just a journey, a train journey, and the narrator is reminiscing about his past and about thinking about his actions and how he behaved and how things were in the past. Also, kind of questioning his actions in a way. So it is very similar to that. But yeah, their writing is quite different because I think in Passage North we have long passages and it's quite dynamic here compared to
Mm-mm.
that.
So at the opening of the story, where are we in time?
So we are in 1950s, mid 50s,
Okay.
where Darlington Hall has been bought by a new American gentleman. And after the death of Mr. Darlington, Lord Darlington, so he suggests Mr. Stevens, the butler, to he is going to America, so let's just why not you go ahead and take a trip and see the west of England.
Very interesting. And then the his flashbacks go back, I think, to even before both World Wars.
Both world wars, yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes even before his tenure at how he started, his job as butler, and before his tenure at Darlington Hall. So there's a very quite interesting anecdotes in the book about what being a butler means, and I think this is the thing that fascinated me most was that it was written from a perspective of butler and how their extreme dignity that the job demands there are so many layers inside them that we are not talked about, never talked about in literature. I've seen like that the subject matter was quite interesting.
That does sound fascinating. I'm actually reading a Irish novel now that is mostly from the perspective of servants, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of it too. It's by George Moore called Esther Waters. I think it was published in 1894, and that aspect of the story is fascinating. So,
Yes.
is this your first Ishiguro?
No, this is my second Ishiguro. So I read Never Let Me Go, the first one, actually few months back. So before that, before December last year, right, I was not an avid reader. Used to read books like around 6, 7 books a year. But now I have like really transformed during the pandemic and made it around 70, 80 this year.
Yes, you are.
So then I just
You're in the big leagues now. That's fantastic. And you liked
Never Let Me Go. Yes,
Never
I,
Let Me
I
Go.
actually like, yeah, I like that one as well. I think about it and compare both the books. I liked Remains of the Day a little better,
Hmm.
but Never Let Me Go was also quite fascinating. And especially, he has a very unique style of writing from first person, and then talking about the past, and slowly we get to know more details throughout the book, and in the end, you form kind of a bigger picture of how things are. So, and he has quite interesting subject matters as well. In Never Let Me Go, it's written from a perspective of a mid 20s or around close to 30s female.
It's a very different story from The Remains of the Day, and I didn't care for it as much as you did. I'm glad I read it. But I think The Remains of the Day is more of a Sean book.
Yes.
Is it a long book? How many?
No, it's not long. It's around 250 pages or something.
Is there anything that you didn't like about it?
So not such a strong opinion, but yeah, sometimes. So there are few instances in the trip when he meets certain new people on the road, and he talks to them about certain things, and they have their own remarks. And those instances I really liked. So, but those instances revealed to me that sometimes the book was becoming monotonic. So when those instances came, I actually got more interested in it, right? So that also revealed to me, because books like these, like A Passage North, and even this one, when it is told completely from the perspective of one voice and his own way of thinking and speaking, sometimes it can be a little tiring and monotonic. So when these instances came, when he met certain people in his trip, and they added their own dynamic to the conversation, so that was more revealing to me that it was kind of becoming monotonic at some places.
It gave some variety to the narrative. So I think
Yes.
he does a lot of reminiscing. So I imagine that you meet a lot of characters from his past in his remembering. Are there any other characters in the 1950 that are kind of emerge as important characters in the 1956 part of the story?
I don't think there are very major roles of certain characters in the 1956 part of the story. He does meet Miss Kenton towards the end of his journey. So Miss Kenton was working at Darlington Hall earlier, and now she got married and then moved away. And because the staff is very less now, he also has an intention to go and hire her back, right? So he does meet her, and then they talk about certain things. But her role is more prominent in the in the 1930s 40s
Yeah.
part of the story where she was working.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you've made it sound very interesting to me. So, mission accomplished, Abhishek. This is your first appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, but I hope that you will come back.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to. And given you also like this conversation with me.
Definitely. So, thank you so much, Abhishek.
Thank you so much, Sean.
I am delighted to welcome back to my channel for her second appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, Georgia from the city of York in England. Welcome back, Georgia.
Hi, Sean. It's good to be back.
It's fantastic to have you back again. And you're going to tell me about an autobiographical novel from France. The English title is Nothing Holds Back the Night by Delphine de Vigan.
Yes, that's correct.
And I don't have the translator on my screen, so please tell me who the translator is.
It's George Miller, and it's a 2013 edition. It was originally published in 2013. in English.
Great. Okay, so you really loved this. You said you feel passionate about it. So share the love, Georgia.
I do, yes. I discovered Delphine de Vigan through one of her novels, Loyalties, which is actually a later book. But this is a fictionalized memoir, and it is around her mother's suicide. So we know from the first paragraph that de Vigan is the one who discovered her mother's body after she had been dead for a few days. And then the book starts narrating her mother's life and that of her family from when she was a little girl. And the tone completely changes. We get drawn into this family, which by all accounts was very charismatic, very bohemian, beautiful summers, spent in the countryside or by the coast. They had a lot of children. And then tragedy starts striking. So one of her mother's younger brothers died in an accident. Then her parents become foster parents to another kid who again dies in tragic circumstances. And we start realizing that there is a strand of mental illness running through their family. So a lot of her mother's brothers and sisters have been affected. So her mother was a child model when she was young, and she does mention at some point in the book later on that she says she was a very beautiful child but paid a very high price for it. So her mother struggled with mental health illness throughout her life. She had her ups and downs, but for the most part, the first part of this book is really narrating the story of this family, and it's really beautifully written. The Vigan is very good about describing trauma and the effect this has in wider circles, both within the family, but in the community around it. And then the second part is about the Vigan's mother has gotten married to her first boyfriend and had her and eventually her sister as well. And from that point on, the book reads more like a proper memoir because the author puts herself in the story. She can start remembering her own memories of some of the stories. It doesn't have to rely solely on the remembrances of her uncles and aunts and her grandparents. And it's a beautiful book. It's not always easy to read because you can see this woman who was plagued by depression, and I think eventually she was diagnosed as bipolar. It wasn't always easy for her to care for her children. And in fact, her children witnessed a lot of her breakdowns. They were threatened by her a number of times. They were certainly neglected, but she was always trying her best. And there were times during, when her medication was being regulated and after she had been sectioned a couple of times, when she tried to make the best for herself. She became a social worker. She was working initially with AIDS patients, I think, in 80s France, in Paris. But there have always been these ups and downs. And towards the end, the book starts reading a bit like a car crash. I mean, you start remembering back that first paragraph, which because of her writing, so beautiful, you forgot about it. And then it comes full circle about those last days. It's very intense, but incredibly beautifully written.
But not too heavy.
No. It's about these moments of lightness. She wants to highlight that her mother wasn't just a sick person.
Right.
She does not want to just focus on depression and the suicide. She wants to bring her mother alive through this story.
It sounds like she very much did.
Yes, I think it's a remarkable book. Yeah.
Very intense, and it sounds like an author that I knew absolutely nothing about that I need to check out. So thank you so much, Georgia.
You're very welcome, Sean.
I am absolutely delighted to welcome an old Litsy friend. Not that she's old, she's about 26, I think. But we've known each other on Litsy for 5 or 6 years, and I've never had a Zoom chat with her before. So this is really exciting. Trish from Liverpool. Welcome, Trish.
Hi, Sean. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's so fantastic to have you here. And you have recently read a nonfiction book called Paper Bullets, and the subtitle is long but informative: Two Artists Who Risked Their Lives to Defy the Nazis, by Jeffrey H. Jackson. And it sounds absolutely fascinating. So I hope you're going to tell us all about it.
I'll do my best. So this contains things that I love in fiction and non-fiction, which is basically women rebelling against oppression and the system. So that's one of my favourite genres. So the artists that it's about are called, in their day-to-day life, Lucy Schwab and Suzanne Malherbe. In their artist's life, they're called Claude Cahoon and Marcel Moore. So they meet as teenagers and quite quickly become a couple. And we're talking about the 1920s here. So being a couple is a big thing that's hidden from family mostly. But they also become stepsisters because one of their fathers and one of their mothers marry. So this is important in later life because it becomes a shield for them. So during the 1920s and 30s, they join the avant-garde scene in Paris as artists. And they're known for what the Nazis later called degenerate art. So they're known for cross-dressing, slightly risque pictures of each other. Lucy's always the one that's in the pictures, and Suzanne is behind the camera taking the pictures. So it's a relationship of art, and you get to see some of their pictures in the book as well. And you can see a lot of their pictures online now. Now they've become a bit more known. So fantastic backstory of who they are and how they come together as a couple and a partnership. So we get to late 1930s. Obviously, things are changing, clouds of war over Europe. Paris and Berlin are obviously the centre of the artistic scenes at that time. But obviously, that starts to get closed down gradually as things change in Europe. So they make a decision in the late 1930s. They're both from well-off families. They're used to having a bit of money. So they're not the black sheeps of their families because their family never disown them, but they are they're doing their own thing over there. So that's sort of the family, but they're never cut off. They have money. They're well off. They decide to move to Jersey, which for people that don't know is one of the Channel Islands that is British, but you can see France from the island.
That's right.
But it's British. So they decide to move to Jersey because they think they're going to have an easier, quieter life as a couple. They can see that if, obviously we don't know that France is going to fall and be overtaken by the Nazis at that point, but they have a bad feeling basically. So they take their money, they buy a lovely house in Jersey and think that they can sit out anything that's going to happen in Europe. For anybody that doesn't know history, the Channel Islands were the only bit of Britain that were actually invaded and occupied by the Nazis through the war. So 1940, Nazis arrived, took over Jersey. So they're an occupied island now. Lucy and Suzanne, who are living as stepsisters because Jersey is a very different society from what they were living in Paris. So that's their cover to be together. They even have separate bedrooms in their house for when people come round and the maids come round and so on. So that's their cover to live together. So that's quite sad. That always makes me a bit sad, but that was 1940s. Obviously the war comes, the Nazi occupies the islands and they decide that they don't like this. There isn't a resistance movement on the island, as in nobody is planting bombs, running down the street with guns, but there's a quiet resistance, obviously, to their day-to-day life. So Lucy and Suzanne decide they're going to use paper bullets propaganda, which for people who don't know, paper bullets are basically, as they say, they're using words and propaganda to fight back against the resistance. And I hadn't heard that terminology before. So
No.
when that came out in the book, I was like, oh, that's what it means. And it's so obvious once you've read it. So, so that's what propaganda was called, both sides. Obviously, I've been brought up in the UK with the Nazi propaganda, what they used and everything. But every other country used the same propaganda. We obviously just didn't see as much as that. And because other countries won, not lost, we see a lot of the history from the point of view of the other side, as in the things they did. Lucy and Suzanne are really well-educated women who basically sat down themselves and said, we're going to use our education. Suzanne spoke German. We're going to use our education and our background to do what we can to fight back against this occupation on our island. So they had an old typewriter hidden away upstairs. They started typing out this propaganda, and they would type hundreds of pieces of paper. And then they would fold them up, they would leave them in soldiers' coats, they would leave them in barracks, they were risking their life to leave them in places, they would scatter the leaflets in places where people could pick them up. And they were all little stories about demoralizing the soldiers. So as the war went on, it was about insults against Hitler, calls to rebellion. What do you think your wife's doing at home? You know, you're going to get sent to the East, and just this massive propaganda. And there was millions of them. They were typing them every day. They were putting them out. And this went on. They managed to do this for 4 years without any suspicion falling on them, because basically they were seen as two spinster sisters living together in this house. So the cover that they had was working for them. Obviously, as the war went on and the Nazis started losing, they became more paranoid about this propaganda on the island, and they really put some oomph behind trying to find who was doing it. And basically, they were betrayed. So the Nazis didn't find them as such. Someone decided that they were going to betray them. The women were arrested and tried and sentenced to prison. And that's probably a point of which I'll leave the story, because their story of when they were in prison is harrowing, as you would expect. And I'd like you to read and engage in their story and go away and read it. They're really not a well-known couple of rebels. So the more I can get their voice out there and you go and have a read of this story would be fantastic.
Oh my God, what a cliffhanger. So I cannot remember the last time that I had somebody tell me about a book of kind of history or nonfiction that was this gripping. That is an absolutely incredible story.
I'm glad you feel like that, because I do love these two women. That I've taken them to heart, and I'd like to tell their story, you know. And I think it's little known, and I think the Channel Islands and the story of the occupation is little known as well. So that fight back to the occupation and the oppression is it fascinates me, and people risking their lives to fight back against oppression, it always fascinates me. And you know, what would you do if you were there? Would you have fought back?
That's right. Just incredible. So do you remember how you came across this book, or how, I mean, you've talked about kind of what kind of reading you like to do about rebellious women, but the book, I've never heard of the book. How did you kind of find out about it?
The book's come out recently, last year, and I'd read a fictionalized story of the account of the women, which is this one by Thomson.
Rupert Thomson. Oh, isn't he a gay writer from the UK?
He is a gay writer, and I'd never heard of him. So I came across him by an interview with David Bowie. And obviously we all know David Bowie loved his books and he loved artists. And he said, I love Rupert Thomson's books. And I thought, I've never heard of Rupert Thomson. So I wrote that down. Okay, I'll go and have a look at that. And then he said, and I love these two women, and I've been to see an exhibition of their art. And I thought, that sounds like me as well. I'll go and have a look at that. So I went and had a look and bought this book, and I loved them. It's the fictionalized version. So the author has brought the women to life. you love them in this book. You see the love story behind it. You see their relationship, their support for each other, and basically their decision together for what became the paper bullets and the campaign against the Nazis. So it was, I don't often read love stories, but when I do, this is the sort of love story I like, where you get that. So the difference, so obviously when the non-fiction came out, I thought, oh, I'm going to see how much of the fictionalized version is true. It's every single fact in the non-fiction version is in the fictionalized version. The only thing the fictionalized version does different is puts the flesh on the bones of the women's relationship. So the non-fiction version doesn't veer into, I think this made the women feel this. It just gives you the facts, as non-fiction should, with the evidence, and it's a properly authored book. It has all the evidence in, it has notes, it has, it's a proper work of biography. But the fiction just gives you that little bit of
extra
love for the women in how they got through that.
Oh, this is just absolutely fascinating. You've sold me 10 times over. I read your review on Litsy, which is what made me ask you to come on on Bite Size Book Chats, and oh my goodness, I don't think I'm going to be able to wait very long before reading the books.
Hope you do.
So this has been great, Trish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. I hope I've spread the message a bit more.
You sure have, and I hope you'll come back and spread messages about other books about rebellious women later, will ya?
I'm sure I've got many of them. Yeah.
Thanks, Trish. I would like to welcome a book blogger from Calgary, Alberta that I have been following on Twitter for quite some time, and reached out to him when I read his great review of this book. And here he is on Bite Size Book Chats. Joseph from Calgary, welcome.
Hello.
Nice to have you here. And your book blog, which of course will be linked in the show notes, is Rough Ghosts, and it is fabulous. And you read and write about a lot of translated fiction. Tell us a little bit. You have some kind of a connection to the Indian publisher Seagull Books.
Yeah, I started reading them. It was another blogger altogether that wrote about a book that they put out, and I ordered it, and I was blown away by the way it was presented and how gorgeous it was. And so I started ordering more, and it's mostly through Twitter. I got to chatting with the publisher, Naveen Kishore. And at one point, I was thinking about doing a writing conference thing. And I decided it wasn't far enough away from home. And I realized that for about the same amount of money, I could fly to Calcutta.
Wow.
And I said, I really should come and, do a pilgrimage to your office. And so he said, anytime. So I ended up making my first trip to Calcutta in 2018. And I met a lot of people. And I started getting to know Indian poets and bloggers and other people elsewhere in the country. So I went back. And the second year I went back, 2019, I went back to Calcutta. And they asked me to speak to Edwin Frank, who's the founding editor of NYRB Classics.
Oh, okay.
At the Victoria Memorial, no pressure, which is a gorgeous marble building in Calcutta.
Wow.
And I've taught both years I was there. I taught a session in their publishing class, and that's been really neat. I mean, I've met young people that I've kept in touch with over the years and met up with again when I've been back in India. And I made a third trip just before the pandemic. So now I'm waiting to make another trip.
Yeah.
When it's possible. But they are just wonderful people there. A very tiny office. There's, I think, 6 main editors, and they work 6 days a week. I think they do amazing work. And I think Sanandini Banerjee, the designer, is amazing. You can always tell her work. It doesn't matter what is on the cover. You look at it and you go, that's a seagull. And I mean, that's half of the beauty of it, is just collecting beautiful books. So
do
that's
put-
my connection.
Their covers are gorgeous, yes. So the book that you recently reviewed that I wanted to chat with you about, the author is Venus Khoury-Ghata, The Last Days of Mandelstam, translated from the French by Teresa Lavender Fagan. So tell us about it, Joseph.
I'm not too familiar with the author. She is quite well known, and some of her work is translated from French, but she is primarily a poet, born in Lebanon, and then moved to France, where she currently lives. She's now in her 80s, but this book would have been written, it came out in like 2016 or something. So this is a work of a mature writer, and you can just tell. It's not really a biography about Mandelstam, and yet it is. Like, it gives you enough biographical information to get you going, or if you already know him, I would think you would marvel at the way she just works in these details, often just in a sentence here and a sentence there. You can tell she's a poet. It's amazing.
That's fantastic. Before you go any further, Joseph, just for people who, like me, don't know much about Osip Mandelstam, please give us just a couple sentences about who he was.
Okay, he was a Russian poet, born Jewish. I believe he converted to Christianity. He was part of the group of poets like Akhmatova and Pasternak, but a number of this literary community, and some of them sided to save their necks with Stalin's regime, and others didn't, and paid a price. Mandelstam, he wrote a poem that actually was never published publicly, and it's called Stalin's Epigram, and it's a satire about Stalin. It didn't go over too well. And that's really what got him in trouble, as far as I know. That was the main thing that got him exiled. He was exiled several times. He was imprisoned for a period of time, and ultimately ended up dying in 1947. He was particularly tenacious in that he would not give up this idea of the value of poetry. His wife was largely responsible for getting his pieces out. He would recite a poem to her, and she would write it down, and then she would get them out to people that they could trust, many of whom themselves ended up with unfortunate ends. And she committed everything to memory. After his death, she wrote a lot of it out. So she was really vital. But, for him, the poetry was quite dangerous. And some poets like Pasternak tried to help him out financially, but didn't want to get involved because he was, I guess, trying to keep his head on his shoulders. This book beautifully describes them wearing the same clothes for years on end, until they were just about falling off. And then some benefactor would get them a new outfit to wear. And their lives were very, very meager, very brutal, often in very cold locations. For him, everything was about poetry. He ultimately ended up in a transit camp near Vladivostok. He was on his way to Siberia, but the majority of the people in the camp got infected. He ended up dying there. So this book really starts with him on what will be his deathbed, a plank in this prison camp where he doesn't know if he's dead or alive. And he's really losing interest in food. People, as they're nearing death, they don't have a lot of interest in food. So his cellmates are quite happy to just raise his hand to get his bread. He would talk about the good things, and he would talk about his friends, and then he would talk about camping with them, and then he would start losing the thread of what actually happened. But it was his way of kind of sorting things out, his regrets. And she captures that really through this Mandelstam character. It's hard to say character because when someone's that close to death, they're kind of a shifting self. And that's what struck me about this book was it could be something really brutally dark, and it is dark, but it isn't either. It's kind of giving dignity to a man whose death is not recorded. It's really more a story about the poetic spirit and this man's fate and his stubborn belief in the power of poetry right through to the end. That's what the book's about.
There it is in a nutshell. That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much.